He was born in near Bolton, then went to Bolton School, which was a grammar school, but left at 15 and went to Bolton Technical College, and then to sea as a engineer cadet, and sailed with shell tankers for 18 months to get sea time in. And then, as I say, during that time his parents moved up to Glasgow, and so instead of going back to Bolton, he came to Glasgow and went to Harland and Wolff shipyard, and was there for 18 months doing day release for exams and shipbuilding experience. Then after that, he went back to sea with shell tankers for a short while, and then decided that he'd prefer not to be on tankers because of the amount of time they were at sea. So he joined the British India Steam Navigation Company and started sailing from the UK to India and the Far East. And when the ship came into London, I would go down and visit him. Before we were married, I'd visit him, and then after we were married, I could join the ship with him and sail around the continent to Rotterdam, Hamburg, Antwerp and back. Then I would have to come home and he'd go away back to sea again. And Graham, our eldest son, came with us after he was born. But if the ship went into dry dock, Graham stayed with my mother because there was no water on board. But anyway, then in 1962, he came ashore to do his chief engineer's exams, and then decided to do what they called then it's equivalent to a degree. They didn't have degrees in marine engineering those days, they do now. And he did the exam for that, and then that enabled him to get a good shore job. So he didn't go back to sea again after 1964, and got a shore job down in England with Circ Controls, who at that time were beginning to install computers on ships. He didn't know much about the computers, but he knew about how they could be installed and where they should be installed. So travelled from Warwickshire, where we lived, to all over the UK.
So it was a life of moving about and
he
journey and
never
travel.
stopped. Well, I'll get there later. So then, after almost 2 years with Circ, he decided that he was not a fan of Harold Wilson, so he was looking for jobs abroad, and had applied for several, but in the end decided to take the one in Hong Kong as a marine surveyor in the Marine Department in Hong Kong. And so he went in the January, and I was expecting Jeremy, so I couldn't go till Jeremy was born. And then from then on, he was 7 years in Hong Kong, 2 years in Greece, then 5 years in Holland, 12 years in Canada, 9 years in Holland, and then retired. And even though he was ashore, he was away a lot, a great amount of the time. So when he retired, he had his own consultancy for about 4 or 5 years. But then, unfortunately, in 2005, he got cancer. And so after that, he didn't work anymore. He recovered well, but he still didn't work. By that time, he was over 70. So, and
Did he enjoy the travel?
Oh yes, that's what he lived for, as well as collecting. Those were the things he lived for. Because then, as well as doing his consultancy work, he started going on trips to places. Because in Canada, in my daughter's basement, we have a map with pins in of everywhere he's been in the world. And there aren't many blanks, except Russia and, well, he has been to Russia, but the very bleak areas not, and Greenland he hasn't been to, but there's not many other places. And he was really wanting to go to Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, but I told him that I thought he was a bit too late to start going to yurts and things like that.
So he was an adventurer.
Yes, Yes, he was, but latterly, the last 2 trips, he was beginning not to be quite so well, so he got a bit flustered then. He went to Madagascar and Reunion and Mauritius, one of his last trips. And the very last one, apart from one with me to Madeira, he went to Sardinia and Corsica. But by then he wasn't quite so well, so we realised then he couldn't go on his own. He went on the trips on his own because he had his camera and the scenery. He wasn't interested in standing to look at the scenery except behind his camera. And so me being there was not really, it was a waste of money.
So that's interesting. So a camera to Neville was like a companion.
Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah, definitely. Mm-hmm. And I mean, we'd have to go around. If we one year we went to in Sweden. We were visiting friends, and the children were with us. They were young then, and he found out after he'd gone around all these places, taking photographs, that it hadn't worked. So we had to go round all again, and I was the only one that would get out of the car to have my photo, because he always wanted a family member at that time in the photo to prove that we'd actually been there. And then in Hydra in Greece, that happened again, but I wouldn't go around with him that time. He had to go around by himself.
And what was it about taking pictures that captured his imagination?
I think it was just he took good photographs, so I think he enjoyed the results and being able to frame trees and make it more a picture rather than just a photo. Just something that he really enjoyed doing, but he was completely absorbed with it, completely absorbed. So he enjoyed that. So when he did that, I used to go and see. Well, after he was retired, I went to see the family then. So
and he just travel with his camera.
And he'd travel with his camera, yes. So.
And so going back, how did you meet?
Well. The scout group from St Margaret's Church, Newlands, went to the fire station in Glasgow, and the youth fellowship went the same night. And so I met him there, and so he asked me home, to take me home. But what I hadn't realised, I mean, this is just, he had initially asked my girlfriend, and she'd said no. But I didn't know that. He came round the other side of the fire engine and asked me. But that's how we met. And then he still had another 2 or 3 months at home before he went back to sea, and so we started going out then. And
when was this?
1957. 1957. We met in February, and he went back to sea in the April. Then he was home again in September for 2 or 3 months, and then away again. So until we were married in 1960, he was coming and going like he did the rest of his life. And we were married in 1960 in St Margaret's, Newlands, and then we went to Cornwall on honeymoon, and then the last week of the honeymoon I spent on board the ship that he was sailing on. And he sailed, and then I got a letter from the company saying that he was being transferred from this ship to one that travelled from Mombasa to Durban, and that I could go on one of their passenger ships to Kenya in May. So I didn't hear from Neville, because there was no way of having any correspondence that was quick in those days. So the company booked me on the ship, so off I went, not knowing what I was going to expect. My mother thought I was going to live in a mud hut. And I arrived in Mombasa after a 3-week journey on board, which was very nice, because and actually Neville, unfortunately, had ear problems, So he had, instead of going straight to Durban, he also came to Mombasa because he'd had to go to hospital in Nairobi with ear problems. So he was able to meet me, which made it much nicer. Although with it being a fairly family-orientated shipping company, there were other people that would have met me, but it was easier with he was there. So then he continued then for a year sailing between Mombasa and Durban, home for 11 days roughly, and then away again and up and down the coast with going to all small ports, Dar es Salaam, Zanzibar, Mozambique and Durban. And Graham, our eldest son, was born there, and then we, after 13 months there, we came back to Scotland and rented a flat in Newton Mearns, and he went back to college to do his some engineering degrees with exams, and then he went back to sea again and sailed, and then he was sailing from London out to India and back, and then as I say, he came ashore to do his tickets, and the exam was his extra first class engineering exam. I couldn't remember the name. And then, as I say, he came ashore and we went down to, so that was our initial few years. Graham was born in Mombasa and came home with us.
And how did you end up here, where we are now?
Well, my father was originally from St Andrews, but he died when I was 5, but he was one of a big family. And so my mother had kept going backwards and forwards a little bit later on, not when I was young, to St Andrews to visit members of the family. So we decided that as most of her friends in Glasgow were scattered and she was getting older, that she would move through to St Andrews. So anytime we came on leave, that was where we came, although it was more just me because Neville was still usually working or something. And we started looking for houses in St Andrews and the environments, and then this house in George Terrace was the only one I could see that would fit everything, or he could see that would fit everything. I'd looked at houses from London up to here with my girlfriend, and I'd sort of asked him to look at this, that and the next thing, but nothing would fit, so it was no use. Because he has some very nice, well, it's 50 odd years old now, teak furniture from Hong Kong, and that was what he didn't want to get rid of. And to find a house that would fit that kind of furniture wasn't easy.
So how did it, can you tell me how Neville got his first camera in his collection?
Mm-hmm. Well, he'd been retired a few years, but we went to Vancouver for Christmas to visit our daughter, and our son came down as well, one of them. And because I didn't have much to do on Christmas Eve as my daughter was cooking, we went for lunch in Horseshoe Bay where there are some antique shops. And we were just wandering around it, and I saw this camera, and I said to Neville, if you weren't with me, I would buy that for you for Christmas. And he said, well, buy it anyway, and you can wrap it up. So I did. And then immediately after Christmas, we went down to Oregon, where we had spent quite a bit of time when we actually lived in Vancouver. And of course, down in particularly the West Coast, there are a lot of antique shops and charity shops. So he's decided to start pottering around all these, and managed to find quite a few cameras that he liked. And from then on, it just expanded from there. And at that time, when you travelled between Britain and Canada, you're on the airline, your luggage wasn't quite as restricted as it is now. So he had this huge suitcase that he would fill. And as I say, a lot of the cameras did come from charity shops and antique shops. He discovered he wasn't feeling so well. He discovered that he needed a quadruple bypass. So this that went reasonably well. He had a bit of a problem, but after he recovered from that, he was still on leave because he hadn't got his full strength back. We went back to Canada, and that was when he went back down to Oregon and started collecting even more cameras. Whenever he went to Poland or any of the countries he travelled to for work, he would search out on the Saturdays, or there would be flea markets, and at that time too, Poland were getting rid of a lot of Russian things, and that's when he found a lot of the Russian cameras. Then he would try and find cameras from every country, even on holiday, whether it was France or Germany is not difficult, of course, Italy, Hong Kong, and he would ask friends also if they happened to have time to find a camera for him from a certain country to bring back. Particularly the large ones from Poland, if there would be a ship that was actually sailing from Poland to Rotterdam, and they would bring it back for him. Sometimes, though, he did take them on the plane, and that caused quite a bit of confusion with customs if he had, say, 10 or 12, but he did bring some back by himself. But the very big one, no, that was the ship back down for him. As far as I understand, it's just over 3,000. The catalogue that I've just found is up to 2,700, but latterly he hadn't been cataloguing quite as much as he was. He really enjoyed talking to people about it when he could bring them into the hall and show them everything. He would, and I used to have to come down and rescue them sometimes because he didn't know when to. He really did enjoy talking about them, but he didn't use them. Initially, he talked about trying to get, not when it was this large, but a spool, a film for each camera and taking a photo with, but that never happened. As I say, once he got them on the shelves, that was his main hobby, was really collecting and putting them on the shelves. He wasn't so interested in taking photos anymore, except with his own camera at home, that he always took with him. A lot of the original ones from the 1800s, I think some of them are over there. The very early ones, he was very proud of. Yes, the very early ones. When he was due to retire, we'd bought the house in George Terrace, and we'd originally thought that the downstairs front room could be made into the camera museum. But before we bought the house 2 years before he retired, and in those 2 years I realised that there was no way that everything was going to fit in. So I said, I saw an advert in the newspaper from DM Hall, Edinburgh, about the Salvation Army Hall in St Monans, and I said maybe we should look at something like that. So when we came over on one of our visits, we came down and looked at it, and it was ideal because of the windows of the ceiling lights, and plenty of room for shelving. And so Neville decided to buy it, and then started shelving it. He did a lot of the shelving himself, but some of it he had to get help with. Well, when he was working, of course, his work was what he would go up to the Arctic, and most of the people there would take time off to sleep and things, but he would get so involved that he would work because it was daylight up there on ships, I'm talking, and he wouldn't stop. But that was his obsession then more. But it was after he stopped working, although he did start the cameras before that. When he was younger, no, not so much. But then I would introduce him to something and think, oh, that's nice, he might like to do that. And then that would take over completely, like embroidery, rug making, making the teddy bears. He must have made well over 100, 150 teddy bears. Ugly dolls, which I don't think they have in the UK, but in Canada they have. And my granddaughters had them, so he borrowed one and he made a pattern, so he made about 50 ugly dolls. My daughter banned him from making any more, but that didn't stop him.
So when he gets into something, that's when he gets his mind into something, he goes
all out, completely all out. Yes, he won't stop. I mean, he'll get up in the morning at 8 o'clock and he'll be doing, if it was a teddy bear, he'd be making it till midnight without going out. And the same with the embroidery. If he was embroidery, it's cross stitch, not well. He did some embroidery as well, but he would be doing it all day long.
And the cameras were one of them.
Yes, that's right. Yes, it's a little different from, but it meant he was out a bit more, which was good because he would have to go to all the different places to look for them, and the charity shops and the antique shops in the States were always nice. I enjoyed them more because there was a lot more for me to look at there than in the charity shops.
What was it about the camera specifically, you think, that captured his imagination?
I think the variety, the different varieties, but he never really said why. It was just that he started and continued.